Let's go JavaScripting! Hi everybody and welcome to another exciting edition of Boring JavaScript. I'm your host, the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and today we're taking a look at the this object. Yep, we're going to show you when this is this and this is that, or when this could be the other thing, or even when it's the other this or something to that effect. Yeah, we're going to show you all the different nuances that you could have with this depending upon its lexical context, and we'll tell you what lexical context means. Now, we're going to be covering a whole lot of stuff here, and some of this stuff some of this stuff on this you may already know. So what I've done with this video is I have put a table of contents down at the bottom. If you hover your mouse over the little bar in the video that shows you how far the progress has gone in playing the video, it will show you different chapters. So let's say you already know how this works within classes, but you've never know how this works within arrow functions. Well, you can skip all the way over to the arrow functions and just click there just by looking at just by finding out what point it is on the time scale. And that's it. So without further ado, let's get to this. Let's get started. So let's first talk about lexical context. Now that basically means generally, what scope am I in when this is created? This is created during during runtime, and it is read-only, so I can't say something like this equals me. That does, let's put the quotes around that, make sure it's right. I can't say that because this is read-only and is created when code is actually executed at runtime. Now, lexical content basically says, or context, excuse me, basically says, okay, I've got to create this. What is my current scope? And then the JavaScript runtime engine will sit there and say, oh, your current scope is blah, blah, blah. And then this will say, okay, I'm now equal to blah, blah, blah. And certain methods or certain functions and certain constructs will create their new create a new lexical context, while certain other ones will not. So, therefore, let's take a look at some of the things that will affect this. So, if I just do a console.log this, let's go into Node, and let's just type in Node this. We get undefined. And that basically means this is strict mode. Again, I'm not going to do any kind of non-strict mode, so don't go yelling at me, hey, if I do this, it gives me something else. If you're in strict mode, it's going to give you undefined. I'm in strict mode here, so there we are. So I'm within, this has picked up the lexical context of at the root level. Within Node here, the root level is undefined. In Windows, it could be depending upon where you're executing it, and if it could be the window object, or it could be undefined, or like for instance, if you're in a module, it could be undefined. So basically, this is undefined. So let's take a look at some code. Now here's some code that creates a very simple object, and this object has three properties: name, type, and who am I. And notice who am I is assigned to the word this. Now when you create this object, or when you create a variable within JavaScript, it does not change what they call the lexical context of the operation. So when this object is created and JavaScript system says, I need to have the new value for this, the JavaScript runtime engine is going to come back and say, your lexical content is undefined because you're at the root. And so it's going to report back as undefined. So when you have this within an object, when it's just a plain old property, that should come back as undefined, because creating an object or creating a variable will not create a new lexical content. Okay, so now let's take a look at this particular object here. Same object, but now I've included a function as a particular property. Now, when this function is executed, which it is on line 12, when you create a function and when it is executed, it creates its own lexical content. So it will pick up or make its lexical context, excuse me, not content, context. It will pick up its own lexical context as whatever scope it is in. When it executes walk in this particular case, or this walk function, the scope is the myCat scope, because at this point, when the walk function has been executed, myCat has already been created. So with this new lexical content, when I get to this.name or the console.log this, JavaScript's going to say, hey, I need a value for this. And the lexical context is going to come back and say, yeah, I'm within the myCat object, so here's your scope. And so it's going to say, okay, this should now equal to myCat. So this.name will be myCat.name. Yeah, that will work. And then this should come up to be myCat. So this will kind of show you that when I create the object here, when I do the console.log, which is what happens in line 9 here, I should see who am I still should be undefined, because when it is created, the lexical context is still the root. But when this walk function gets executed, the lexical context, because it is created again at the function by the function, should now be my cat. Well, let's flip back over to Node and let's take a look at that. Let's clear off our screen. Let's go to Node this. And notice that's exactly what happened. I got a Fluffy, my cat Fluffy is walking, and the this for the above object still says that who am I is undefined. But notice it did pick up the name Fluffy. So that shows you that with the this function, it does pick up, basically when you create a function, it will pick up the lexical context or the scope of where it currently resides. So the function here creates its new one. Its scope is now my cat. Outside of the function, the scope, the lexical context, is basically still the root. Okay, now let's take a look at one other very interesting thing about ways you can work with this. I've got another cat object here called my other cat with the name of Mr. Tinkles, and this works exactly the same way. This walk function will print out the word Mr. Tinkles here before giving me this name, while the original one said Fluffy before giving me this name. That's going to become very important here in a minute. So if I was to execute my other cat walk, I should get Mr. Tinkles, my cat, Mr. Tinkles is walking. And let me comment that line because that's for next here. So let's save that. Let's flip over to Node and let's clear off the screen. Let's go to Node this. And sure enough, I got the Mr. Tinkles, and you know, that's exactly what I expected it to do. But let's take a look at some of the things that JavaScript can do for you, which is really, very interesting. Let's uncomment out this line. I am now using the apply command, or the apply function. There's both apply and call. Basically says, hey, you know, if you're going to call, when you call this particular method, I want you to now use something else as the this. So what I have done here is I'm going to call mycat.walk, which we've done before, and so we know it's going to say Fluffy, my cat Fluffy is walking. But by using the apply method here, I'm going to basically say, but I need you to apply my other cat as the this part, which is very important. So now what's going to happen is that when we execute the walk function here, instead of this, which is getting created when function is executed, it's going to say, hey, JavaScript, what's the value of this? Well, what's coming down here, it's going to say, well, in actuality, I know you're within my cat walk, but we were told to apply my other cat for this. So my other cat's going to be this. So when we execute my cat walk, apply my other cat, what we should get here is the Fluffy my cat console.log, but the name Mr. Tinkles is walking because this has been changed. Let's see if that works. Let's go over to Node. Let's clear off our screen. And it sure did. Notice that we got the Fluffy. This shows me that we executed the my cat walk, but the this object is the Mr. Tinkles object. So that's one of the really cute and wonderful things you can do with JavaScript here, is that although this will depend upon where it is being executed, in this case, you know, whether it's being executed, you know, at the root level here, or if it's being executed within a function, we can reapply the console.log. We can reapply the thises if we use things like the apply and walk. Now, that takes care of some certain objects here. How about classes? How does that work within classes? Well, that's next. Okay, so let's take a look at the class. Now, class is nothing more than syntactical sugar over functions. And remember, functions within their lexical context will create a this that is equal to basically the object that's created. And the object created is an object that represents a cat class, or a cat object, for lack of a better term. So I've got a very simple class here that does the exact same thing as we did in our previous video, which I create a name property, and I get the name property from the constructor, and then when I issue the walk, it's going to create the you know, the my cat is walking, this for the above object is this. So what should we expect this to be? Well, we're within a function here, and this particular function is again going to go to JavaScript and say, hey, what's my lexical content? And JavaScript is going to say, oh, we're within this object here called cat, so your this should be cat, this cat instance. And so it says, okay, fine. And so I should be able, this dot name should come out to be Fluffy, because I'm creating Fluffy down here, and this should be the cat itself. And if we go to node, you'll see that's exactly what happens. So if we go to node class, yep, my cat is walking, my cat Fluffy is walking. This for the above object says cat Fluffy, which shows you that this basically became the instance of the cat that I created down here. So that's real simple. There's really not much to it there. What happens when you extend a class? Let's take a look at that code. Okay, so I've got my extended class here. It's called Tomcat, and it extends the class cat, which means basically all I'm doing is I'm now taking all the properties and all the methods of cat, and I am adding things to it or making changes to it as I see fit. So I'm going to run the tail here, a new property called tail, and I'm going to do the constructor. Now, one of the things I'm going to tell you about is that this is not active until you call the super method on constructor. So if I was to sit here and say console.log this right here, that's going to give me an error. In fact, hopefully you'll be, yeah, I think you can see it on the video here. It's, I got the red squiggly line underneath it. So my IDE is sitting there telling me, oh, no, you can't do that. So one of the things you got to understand here about this is that this is only active once you call the super method on the constructor if you are extending another class. So I just kind of want to give you that little heads up on when you use extenders, when this is available and when it is not. Otherwise, I've got the exact same thing here. I've got the walk method here. I'm calling the super.walk, which means I'm calling the 3 console.logs that are available right here inside my class cat. And then I'm adding my own here in which I want to say, do I have a tail or not? So I'm creating a new Tomcat, which I get, my name is Jerry, and it's going to be true. And then I'm going to make the Tomcat walk. So let's go over to node. Let's clear our screen. Let's type in node class. And sure enough, yep, my Jerry is walking. This shows that basically it did call the my cat part of the console.logs. And it says, I have a tail, which shows that the this is, it knows that the this here is the Tomcat this, but it did call the walk method on the my cat because the my cat became extended. So the big thing about the extension here is that this still equals Tomcat. This is still part, the lexical content is still part of the, or is still the instance of the class that we have declared down here. The big thing here is that you cannot access this until the super is called. Okay, next we're going to take a look at arrow functions. Okay, let's cover arrow functions. Now, arrow functions in this work a little bit differently. So let's just take a quick look at it. I've got basically the same code I had earlier. I've got my cat with name, type, and I've got walk, but instead as a function, I now have as an arrow function. And otherwise, it's pretty much the exact same thing. So let's just execute node and see what happens. Type in node arrow, and boom, shakalaka. Holy smokes, what the heck happened here? Type error. Cannot read properties of undefined reading name. So it could not read this dot name. Okay, so what in the heck happened? Well, it's how arrow functions work. Now earlier I said with the lexical context, whenever you have a function, it creates its own lexical context based upon the scope that is currently in. So if we were to go back to the code I had earlier, this walk function picked up the lexical context of my cat, so therefore this equaled my cat. Arrow functions do not do that. They inherit the lexical context. So with the arrow function walk here, what is the current lexical context of my cat? Well, remember earlier when we did this one, when we took a look at the original video here, who am I ended up being undefined because the lexical context or the scope was undefined at this point. Well, that's what's going to happen with the arrow too. It's going to pick up the lexical context as if it was basically another property on the object. So therefore, this is undefined. Since this is undefined right here, this is going to be undefined within the arrow function too. That's why this dot name ended up being undefined. So name said, so it ended up with that. What's that error message again? Cannot read properties of undefined reading name. So that's exactly what happened. Well, you know, of course, we can get around that now, can't we? Let's pop some more code in there. As you know, we can use the apply or call to be able to assign a new this to it, right? Okay, so we'll teach JavaScript not to mess with us. So we go ahead and use our apply method here to apply the myCat to the myCat to become this of the walk method. So let's flip over to Node. Let's clear off the screen and let's go Node arrow, and oh, there it goes again. Cannot read properties of undefined names. So no, apparently you cannot use apply to be able to apply a new this. Well, we got another trick up our sleeves. Let's take a look at that code. So now we're going to be able to use the bind method to be able to create our own variable that binds a new this to the walk method. So let's get rid of that by commenting it out. That should fix the problem, right? You know it's not, because or else I wouldn't have set it up that way. Node arrow and boop, yep, still crashed. So the fact of the matter is you cannot apply a new this to an arrow function. The arrow function grabs its this in the current lexical context. It doesn't create its own like function does. Like, you know, this function creates its own and it will pick up myCat. Well, arrow functions don't do that. So when does the arrow function get a new this? Well, again, it picks it up within the lexical context. So let's take a look at another way that we can write this particular function to see how the arrow function picks up this. So quick as a wink, I've got some new code here. Let me comment out the old code here. So now I've got my other cat, and now look at what I've done here. I've got a walk, and I've turned it back into a function. It's not an arrow function anymore. I've turned it back to a function. And remember, when it sees a function, it's going to change the lexical content. So now everything within this scope here, this equals the lexical content of my other cat. So it should pick up that my name is walking. Now I have a function within, or I have an arrow function, excuse me, within the walk function that I'm returning this.tail. Now earlier this became out as undefined, but what will this come out be this time? Well, it will come out as my other cat. Why? Because it does not create its own lexical context. It will inherit whatever it's currently in. And currently, in this particular case, it's inside the walk lexical context. So when it gets to this.tail, it's going to say, hey, give me this. And what JavaScript is going to do is say, okay, here's my other cat. Now that's opposed to this code up here, where when we say, hey, give me this, it's going to say it's undefined. And that's because the arrow does not change the lexical context, it just picks up what's currently there. And what's currently here is the lexical context for walk, which is my other cat. So this should work out great. I should be able to get my cat is walking, and then I'm going to return do I have a tail, and it should return and I have a tail because my tail is true. Well, let's just check that and make sure. So let's flip over to Node. Let's clear off our screen and go to Node arrow. Yeah, my cat Tom is walking and I have a tail. So we know for a fact at that point that the arrow function picked up the correct this, or it picked up the this for my other cat. And again, the reason it picked it up is because the walk function here created its new lexical context and made this equal to the my other cat. And so the this here with an arrow function just simply picked that up. And that's basically the important things you need to understand about arrow functions. And this also is the reason why you don't use arrow functions as the main functions within a class. Even if you define a class, you define a method, you don't define it as an arrow function. It just blows everything out of the water. This becomes irrelevant, and then everybody has problems and you'll get fired from your job. But anyway, so that pretty much takes care of the arrow functions. Now there is one more thing I want to show you about using this, and that is within event handlers. And that's best to show you within the browser environment. I'll show you that next. Okay, for our final section here, we're going to show you how this works with events within browsers, because I've been hit by this quite a number of times. In fact, when I do interview questions, I include this particular type of example in my interview questions to find out if anybody can figure it out. And nobody has so far, which means I guarantee you everybody's been bit by it. So let me show you how this works within events. So I've got a very simple little web page here. The idea here is that when I click to walk me, it's going to print a message inside the text box there. Now I'm not going to click on anything as of yet. Let's go to our code. Let me show you what the code is. This is the HTML file, and it's real rinky-dink simple. There's my this that showed up. Here's my button, and here's my output. Here is the module I'm bringing in, which is called this.js. So let's go over to this.js. This.js is going to import a class that I'll show you here in just a minute. And it's going to create a new class in which I pass the name of the animal, which in this case is Fluffy. And then I'm going to pass the DOM element for the walk. Click button to walk. And I'm going to pass the DOM element to the output text box. Yeah, real simple here. So let's take a look at that cat class. And this is extraordinarily simple. The idea behind the cat class here is that I'm going to obviously get the name, the button node, and the DOM node. Then I'm going to add an event listener that when I click on click, it's going to call this.walk. So what happens on this.walk? On this.walk, I take the DOM node and I insert adjacent HTML in saying my cat name is walking. So I'm doing my cat, this name is walking. So obviously when I click on the button, it's going to say, you know, it's going to get the word, it's going to get this from the object, which is going to be Fluffy in my case, and it should say my cat Fluffy is walking. So let's flip over to our browser and let's click on click to walk me, and nothing happened. Why did nothing happen? Well, let's go to our dev tools. And let's see if we got an error. Uncaught type error. Cannot read properties of undefined. Reading inserted adjacent HTML. Let's flip over here. So it said insert, it was reading insert adjacent HTML, but it said DOM was undefined. Well, that's not undefined, because if you take a look at this, I'm passing it straight right here. Document, get element ID, output, and I'm saving it right here. Well, actually, right here. But it says it's undefined, which means that if DOM node is undefined, something has happened to this. So let's do some quick debugging here. Let's do a console.log this and see what it thinks it is. So we've done this, we've done that. Let's do a refresh on our screen. And let's do the click to walk me. And we'll keep the dev tools opened up here. Yep, it's got the same error, but oh, look at that. It says this is the button. This is not the cat, this is the button. So why is that? Well, let's flip back over to our code. Let's take a look at this. So here's the add event listener that we call, or that event listener that when we click, we call this.walk. And we know we're getting to this.walk because we got the console.log there and we got the error on line 15. When you do an add event listener, especially things like click, focus, any of these kind of events that are associated with, you know, any kind of actions with humans, one of the things you got to be very careful of is the definition of this once you get into the routine, because it may not be what you expect. And in this case, it isn't, because when you add event listener to it, in this case, especially in this case for the click, what it's going to do here is that when you click on that actual button, it's going to say, okay, what is this? This is the button I'm clicking on, because that is what the add event listener is tied to. The add event listener is tied to the button node. So this is going to become the button. So if this was a focus, if this was a key up, a key down, or anything like that, this will not be associated with where the add event listener was created, which in this case is line 10, and in this case the cat instance. It will be tied to the element on which the add event listener was created. So that is why when we did the console.log this, and we'll flip back over to the browser real quick, that's why when we said console.log this, we got the button ID walk, the button, it's, you know, the button itself. So now knowing that, you now know that this can change intermittently, you know, based upon how you use the add event listener. Now, of course, there's a number of ways to fix this. This is the way I normally like to fix it. Earlier in some examples, we used the apply or the bind method to be able to assign certain thises to it. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to say bind this. And if you're not familiar with bind, I actually did a boring JavaScript, I think a little over a year ago on bind, and I'll put the link to the video down. I'll put the name of the video down here on the screen. But I did a boring JavaScript on bind that tells you all about bind. But what bind does here is it says, okay, when you call this particular routine or this particular method, I want you to, instead of taking this from button node, I want you to assign this to the bind. And what is this? At this point in time, when this gets created, this is the instance of cat. So knowing that, now that we execute walk here, console.log this should be the cat instance, which means this DOM node should be active, insert at JSON HTML should be okay, and it should actually work. Let's flip over to our, let's save it first. Let's flip back over to our browser. Let's clear off our screen, and let's click on the walk me, and I'll keep the dev tools open. Yep, my cat Fluffy is walking. No error this time, and notice that this is now the cat instance. So that's one of the things that you kind of want to watch out for when you're doing this with event listeners inside a browser, is that many times it's going to be associated with whatever object has been add event listener has been attached to. In this case, button node, or if you do document.add event listener click or add event listener key down or whatever, do a global one, it's going to be associated with document. So in those particular instances, if you're within a class and you do an add event listener, if you're so inclined to do something like that, be absolutely certain that if you want to make sure that when you execute your methods, that these methods are within the current this, do a little bind at the very end, and that'll get you what you need. So that's one of the things I want you to make sure that you watch out for here is, again, when you do add event listeners, that this is going to be associated with the element that it was added to and not the instance itself. And that's all there is to this object. I hope you enjoyed our video. Hope I didn't bore you to death. Please make sure you click on the like button below or click on subscribe to this channel. If you want to see more Boring JavaScript videos, visit our website at www.boringjavascript.com or go to www.thevirtualboy.com to see everything that we do. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later.